Wait, are you gaming? On a Chromebook?
Yep. It's got a high-res 120Hz display, plus this killer RGB keyboard. And I can access thousands of games anytime, anywhere.
Stop playing.
What?
Get out of here.
Huh?
Yeah, I want you to stop playing and get out of here so I can game on that Chromebook.
Got it.
Discover the ultimate cloud gaming machine, a new kind of Chromebook.
Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus. This fall, the Disney Bundle has all the action.
Holy smokes!
Watch live NFL and college football games on ESPN Plus. On Disney Plus, there's Loki Season 2.
War is on its way.
And Ahsoka.
Buckle up.
And on Hulu, you can watch The Boogeyman and Welcome to Wrexham.
Oh my God, the expectation.
All of these and more streaming this fall with the Disney Bundle. Blackouts and restrictions apply. 18 plus only. Access content from each service separately. Offer valid for eligible subscribers only. Terms apply.
Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports Podcast, formerly Sports by Northwest, but now the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I'm Bill Oram, sports columnist at the Oregonian and Oregon Live, joined by our man in Eugene, James Crepea, Ducks writer for the Oregonian. James, what's going on, man?
Oh, not too much, Bill. How are things by you these days?
Wonderful. Big weekend of college football upon us, and we're going to dive into your end of things. Obviously, Oregon State's up at Washington State in the Left Behind Bowl, Pac-2 championship, whatever you want to call it. But the even buzzier game than that, and the higher profile from at least a national standpoint game, is happening in your neck of the woods in Eugene with Oregon hosting Colorado. What's game week been like down there at practices with the Ducks? How have those practices gone?
Well, from what limited time we do get to see practice, which is quite limited, it really is. It's just another day kind of thing in terms of nothing changed in period 1 or 2.
Right.
I'll have you know. They are still very much taking part in special teams in period 1. But no, for the Ducks' perspective, for what they've been doing, one, not that they were in a bad health situation at any point so far this season, but it's clearly improving. 2 of the transfers who have yet to play through the first 3 games, Nashad Strother and Justin Jacobs, have been steadily and slowly but surely making their way not just back on the practice field, but doing more on the field while we're there. Nashad Strother doing quite a bit today on Wednesday in that capacity. So from a health standpoint, is that because it's Colorado week, or is it just because they're getting healthier? Probably more the latter. Otherwise, yeah, of course, is there a buzz around this game nationally? Yeah, you know that. I'm sure the players and the coaches all know that. But they preach the message that you would kind of expect, which is, on one hand, they know it, they recognize it, they appreciate it. These are the games you want to play in and play for, et cetera, et cetera. The same token, don't make it more than it is either. And I think that's more, it's all coach speak stuff, but it's nonetheless true. You're not going to deny reality. Yeah, there's more, buzz and whatnot around this game because it's a ranked meeting and Colorado's drawn all this attention, and et cetera. But let's not make it out to be something that it's not. You are still going to play 60 minutes of football on Saturday, and there's going to be a winner and loser at the end of it. There's not some other thing going on here.
Third option.
I mean, I know everybody else wants to turn it into a circus, but believe me, they're not going to be wild animals. That's reserved for Colorado, where Ralphie literally is on the field. There will not be.
Hey, I'll make the jokes here. I was about to make that one, and then you beat me to it.
Good minds or bad minds, one or the other, Bill.
So what you're touching on the thing that I think is most interesting, and I mean, obviously, I'm on the record saying I think Oregon's going to win this going away. I mean, they're favored by 21 points. Colorado's in a world of hurt playing without Travis Hunter, unfortunately, who was the recipient of a really unfortunate late hit against Colorado State in that epic come from behind double overtime game on Saturday. Doesn't change the fact that Colorado is the biggest story in college football. And with, Deion Sanders, I think, did we make it this far in the podcast without saying Deion Sanders' name, Coach Prime? So here it is. This is the Coach Prime portion of the podcast. And what he has brought from a buzz, energy, celebrity standpoint to that program. Has them 3-0, which nobody saw coming, ranked 19th in the country. Oregon's going to be their biggest test at 10th. Oregon heavily favored, but still a huge show in Eugene. And so that's the first thing I wanted to ask you, James. In your years covering the Ducks, and I posed this to you in a text, so I'll let you fill in the blank. This is the biggest game in Eugene since when?
Yeah, it's tough to quantify in that sense. Because if you're saying from a sheer national buzz outside, viewers, it's in a very long time, in a extremely long time. Because from a television rating standpoint, I'm quite curious to see what this game does do. Because it's in that 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern time, prime. Not in prime time, literally, but prime in terms of television inventory by way of up against the CBS SEC game, which is Bama Ole Miss. But Bama looks a lot more mortal than they ever have, certainly over the last 15 years. And Deion has generated this level of interest. Which game is more competitive at the time may very well be the game that has the better rating at the time. To your point, if Oregon does pull away and the SEC game is more competitive, I'm curious. But if you're looking at it from that lens, through there's supposed to be 7, 8, 9, 10 million people watching this game, which is not something that happens very often in general, contrary to this 3-week sample size with what's going on in Colorado, then you'd have to go back maybe ever. In the sense of what's actually happening on the field here. A Pac-12 opener, both teams are 3-0. Somebody's going to be 1-0 in league play. It's a top 20 matchup, but this is not a top 10 matchup, not a top 5 matchup.
Right.
And this in a rivalry.
We had those last year.
That's what I'm saying.
Season.
That's what I'm saying. So you would be disingenuous to say, this game is bigger than the Washington game last year? Not in terms of what's happening on the field, not in terms of the actual fans, but in terms of the casuals, the casual observer who has no affinity, no connection whatsoever, and no dog in the fight. Absolutely, this is bigger. To the Oregon fan and very much our readers and listeners, or to the Colorado fan who actually is a Colorado fan and not a fly-by-night operation, then yes, then this is certainly a big game, but not bigger than any number of others. But
I mean, I think you might point to 3 games on the calendar last year from a competitive standpoint, from a stakes standpoint. And when you have hopes of making the college football playoff, the stakes are sky high every week, because one, you trip up against any opponent and that becomes the biggest game of the season, or the biggest, highest stakes game of your season. But I go back to last year against UCLA. That was a top 10 matchup when Chip Kelly brought a top 10 team to Autzen Stadium. I mean, that felt about as big as it gets at the time. Washington, was making,
but generated zero national attention.
Right. And so I think, and we're talking about the ratings that Colorado has put up so far with the interest that, and the Colorado State game on Saturday, James, the number was insane, astronomical. Something like 9.8 million viewers is a number I have in my head. That may not be right.
It was over 9.
It was a huge number for a game that ended at, I want to say, 2 a.m. Pacific time or 1 a.m. Pacific. I mean, really, burning late into the night. So there's a lot of interest, but that game also had the benefit of being, hey, is Colorado going to come back, in this really enthralling matchup, rivalry game? Everybody had heard what Jay Norvell said. This game doesn't have the same chirping going back and forth that we've kind of heard a lot of. And I guess I'd also be curious for your thoughts on that, James. I think I know what your answer to this is going to be, but were you at all surprised that Dan Lanning didn't engage in any more of the bulletin board material in his weekly press conference on Monday?
No, because there's no need. There's nothing about this to where, I'll say this. What if Deion were around longer? Mm-hmm. And I don't mean, I'm not projecting in terms of what he is or isn't going to do there. I'm talking more in the sense of if this were even the second time they had met, or third or fourth, and there had been a chance for more animus, either built through games or through the recruiting trail. Because there's been some recruiting trail battles already. Sure. Minor, relatively. Not a plethora by any means, because he just hasn't been there long enough. But what had there, teased us out a couple of years or whatever, and what if he was in the conference for the last 3-4 years? Well, maybe it would have been a little bit different. But for a one-off meeting that, let's call it what it is, this is going to be a one-off meeting. These two teams are not meeting. It's the end. These two teams are not meeting in a Pac-12 championship game. That ain't happening. Okay. And they're not meeting in a bowl game this season. And I can't imagine it happening for a while. So realistically, hey, there's not that level of animus. And frankly, even if there were, why would you want to manufacture the lunacy ahead of things unless you were trying to, unless you had something going on your team, whoever the coach is, I don't care who we're talking about, and you needed to create a distraction to avoid attention being on the other thing. That's one thing. And sometimes coaches do that at any level of sport. But here, no, there was no animus. Everything that was said and brought up back from July 31st, which you knew it would be asked again, so be it. But no one who heard it originally, and it blew up at the time, no one has to tell me. But it just was never meant to be directed at Deion or his team. It wasn't. No one there took it as such. Travis Hunter acknowledged as much reality. So the people who were trying to recycle it, I thought were doing so for some very, very self-serving reasons. None of them were affiliated with Oregon or Colorado, at least in an official capacity. So, no, I wasn't surprised that Dan didn't, because there was no reason to, and nothing from before caused reason to. And I thought you heard from both coaches really nothing but appreciation and respect for one another, and I so far have no reason to believe that there's anything but that.
Yeah, and for anybody who's been living under a rock or has just somehow missed this story, Dan Lanning did say at Oregon Media Day, this was right on the heels of Colorado announcing it was going to the
days
Big 12.
later,
Literally
like 4 or 5 days. Yeah.
The Pac-12 was a day away from hearing what the media rights deal George Kliavkoff had secured up to that point was. So there was still a lot of, I think, expectation that these 9 schools were still going to stick together as the Pac-12. So there was some institutional banter, right? And there was some institutional animus maybe happening, but there wasn't.
Not with Colorado.
It wasn't about the team.
If anything,
good riddance.
If you really want to go back to that, if anything, Oregon, Washington, the Big Ten, and Fox should be thanking Colorado.
Well, that certainly was the push off the high dive for sure. James, okay, so a couple of football things I want to get to as well with this matchup. This is going to be the biggest test for Oregon's defense that they've seen through 3 games. Certainly bigger than Portland State and Hawaii, and a little bit of a different kind of challenge from Texas Tech. But Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback at Colorado, who is of course Deion's son, has been nothing short of spectacular this season, putting up video game numbers. He doesn't have Travis Hunter this week as we've hit. What kind of test do you think this is going to be for the Oregon DBs? And then in more broad sense, this Oregon defense has been the question since Dan Lanning got there. And this is year 2 for Tosh Lupoy, the defensive coordinator. The one game where they really had a formidable opponent, I'll say, in Texas Tech, the defense struggled. So what do you expect? And what kind of test does this end up being for Tosh Lupoy's defense?
I think it's the most significant test to date. It will be a very good gauge and barometer for later tests with Washington specifically, potentially with USC as well. And the difference compared this to Texas Tech, schematically, they're not wildly dissimilar, but they're really not very similar. To be honest, and that's like saying everybody with a vertical passing game is similar. It's like not really,
right?
Comparing it to last week would be pointless. They're not a run and shoot at all in any way either. There's unique aspects to how they're going about things schematically. One, Sean Lewis is a really, 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 really good offensive mind. Was when he was a head coach at Kent State, had been sought after by many people. So he has always had a pretty productive passing attack. We'll see if their running game looks a little bit different this week. It sounds like one of the running backs is expected to be back in that context. But ultimately, the amount of vertical passing, particularly with Shedeur Sanders and what he offers and what that receiving core offers, even without Travis Hunter, is just different than what the other receiving cores that Oregon has played so far has. And the combination of quarterback and receiving core. Shedeur is very high in escapability, but he's been sacked a whole bunch. Much of that has to do with the offensive line. Some of that is maybe he's holding on to the ball a little bit. But bottom line is he's still a threat to extend plays. And he'll run here or there, but mainly his threat is to extend plays to open things up for the receiving game. Tyler Shuck could do that, but he obviously had a lot of effectiveness on the ground, 100-plus yards rushing.
Yep.
That's where Oregon's defense had the biggest trouble in that game. They didn't get beat over the top over and over and over again. No, they allowed a couple of passes, and their lead receivers are really good, and the 6'9" tight end's a tough cover. But in the grand scheme of things, all right, a couple of individual matchups here or there, that's going to happen in a game. This combination of the receiving core, which is talented, albeit without Hunter, and a quarterback who can utilize that talent very, 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 very well, and a scheme that puts all those players in great position, that's a tough challenge. Now, the one thing is the glaring weakness of their offense is still their offensive line. They may have a player or two. Their left tackle is ginormous, and he was there a year ago, and he was the one who made the comments about the interior of Oregon's defensive line not being the strength of its defense, and et cetera. He's still around. Outside of that, they've obviously allowed an extremely high number of sacks, in part because of what they do schematically, and in part because they're just not very good on the offensive line. They are facing probably their biggest challenge from a defensive front seven, particularly in the defensive line from Oregon. So that will be an intriguing matchup. But the challenge to Oregon's DBs, it starts with Horn and Weaver, their top two receivers, and with a quarterback who, like I say, obviously has a huge arm, so makes some very good decisions in the throwing game, and is able to utilize and call upon multiple targets to make it happen. And if they can balance that a little bit more with an extra body in the run game, that's going to be a formidable test. More so, certainly, forget about the other two non-cons, even than Texas Tech, because, frankly, I think Colorado's run game might be a little bit better than what Texas Tech had to offer, which, yes, utilized the quarterback run, which was different.
Sanders has been sacked 16 times for 134 yards in 3 games, which is
now 2 of those are Power 5 games. In fairness,
sure, but that is you're giving up 5 sacks a game on average, which is a significant number. James, on the flip side, I want to talk about Oregon's receivers because that is a group that has undergone a major change from last offseason. Obviously, a very visible group of players that you see. Last year, it felt like Bo Nix had Troy Franklin and then not a whole lot of other really reliable options. It feels like they have addressed that via the transfer portal. They went out and got Gary Bryant Jr. from USC. Tez Johnson, obviously, I've written about him a lot. Great story in that he is Bo Nix's, call him adopted brother, essentially, but was raised as a teenager by Bo Nix's family. He's been really effective, has had 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games, 2 touchdowns against Hawaii. And then Trayshawn Holden, who is the receiver from Alabama, who has come in, and they've all made an impact in their own ways. Troy Franklin, I think, is still really clearly the leader of that receiving core, and it's reflected in the statistics. He has the most catches, 17. The next closest is 12, Bucky Irving out of the backfield. But among the receivers, Gary Bryant and Tez Johnson both have 11. Troy Franklin has 3 touchdowns. He's obviously getting thrown to on those big plays way more than anyone else, and he leads them in yardage as well. So, I think if we were going to go ahead and rank the receiving core of this group, last year I think it was Troy Franklin was 1, maybe Chris Hudson was number 2, and it was like a pretty steep drop off. Whereas now, I think that you would say that there is a lot more competition for the number 2 option in the passing game, the number 3 option, the number 4 option. Those are real blue chip players, especially when you talk about Trayshawn Holden and Gary Bryant Jr. So what I'm going to be interested to hear, James, is if you could rank this receiving group, and we're going to say that Troy Franklin is number 1 because he is. Because yes, but through these 3 games, how does the rest of that group shake out? And it doesn't need to be clearly delineated. This is the number 2 receiver, number 3 receiver, number 4 receiver. But who's impressed you the most, and who do you trust the most? How do you rank the rest of those receivers? And is there somebody that we haven't seen as much of yet who needs to be in that conversation that I'm leaving off the list?
Well, because the production from Bryant and Tez Johnson is really, really, really close, I wouldn't draw a huge line delineating the 2 just yet, because I think they're different players and what they do and what they bring, what they offer. Tez, you see much more, and obviously yards after the catch is a huge component of his game. And he is capable of stretching the field vertically. He's capable of major yards after the catch. So he's and mainly in the slot, but can also, yes, operate on the outside. But he's mainly a slot kind of guy. That's certainly his forte. Bryant, you see also in a variety of spots, and it really, and credit to Will Stein so far, in that he's really utilized all these guys in a variety of spots. He's put Troy Franklin in the slot. But I'd say Bryant has been utilized more so outside so far. And some of his better production has come outside. Some of his touchdowns have come lined up outside in one-on-one situations. So I think they're just utilized differently. I think they bring different skills to the table, certainly different body types in that way. Though they both are explosive players, they both operate in punt return and other parts of the game. So they are similar, but as I say, I think they're just a little bit unique comparing their own games. Compared to a Trayshawn Holden, who we've seen also where, the 60-yard touchdown, the catch and run, that was kind of ridiculous against Hawaii. It's like there was no match there. If you take that play away from his production, so you don't let it get entirely skewed, his involvement has been, if you're going to call it surprisingly low so far.
I was going to say minimal.
Yeah. I mean, if you take away that 60 yards, yes, because it came at the end of a blowout and no one on Hawaii was going to be able to cover him in that capacity. It's been a little bit low. That said, between that game in particular, I thought mainly in the second quarter, I thought Oregon did some things schematically where they were using a lot more multi-tight ends at points in that game. Either, again, I can't speak for Will Stein. Was he doing it because it worked out matchup wise? Was it doing it because they were trying to get the ball to the tight ends more? Was it doing it because they wanted to get more blocking there? Or was it they doing it because they didn't want to show much of their 11 personnel package to Colorado and Stanford? Any of those things are possible. Bottom line, when you are operating in 12 and 13 personnel, fewer receivers are on the field. Fewer opportunities are there for Bryant, for Holden, for any number of other players. So I don't know how to put one ahead of the other, Bryant relative to Johnson at the moment. In terms of NFL ability, today, you would say Bryant. In the long run, it may very well be Tez, especially if he's able to gain a couple of pounds. For the NFL, it's going to be hard to be in the NFL at 160 or less. Right. That's just hard. That's it. Holden certainly could get there by way of production, more opportunities as the season goes on. And the question that plenty of fans have as the weeks have gone on is what is going on with Chris Hudson? Where does he fall in this picture? Why wasn't he involved as much? And then, of course, you saw him really throughout the second half last week, but he has yet to get involved by way of production just yet. So ultimately, if a guy who was one of your more productive receivers a year ago is now at best your number 5 option today, that should show that, yes, the transfers that they added in the receiving core, to the shock of nobody, really. I mean, you're talking about Bryant and Johnson and Holden. All 3 transfers came in to upgrade the receiving core, and so far they have done so with their own performances, with their own production, and then relative to others, yes, they brought in 3 transfers to contribute. They're doing just that. I think Hudson's de minimis level of involvement so far was in part due to injury. We saw him limping even a couple of weeks ago. Yes, he was practicing, but clearly he was dealing with something. And okay, he got on the field last week. So I think you're seeing kind of a combination of things. We'll see as the weeks go on if his opportunities increase or not. But they also have some young guys in the receiving core, like a Kyler Casper, like a Justice Lowe, and the 2 freshmen and a Jurion Dickey, who we've seen these guys out there in these blowout games. I don't know how much we'll see this week. But if to the point, the ranking of receivers, I think clearly Bryant and Johnson have separated themselves. Holden would probably be just below that. And then after that, it's kind of hard, to be honest, to rank. I mean, if you're going to go by career production, how can't you say Hudson? But
yeah,
I mean, on the potential and what somebody could be any number of the freshmen who we just haven't had a chance to see a whole lot of just yet.
Yeah, well, and we're probably going to see even less of those guys going forward that you're talking about, just because the schedule's getting real, James.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at where the Ducks go next. I mean, there's currently 8 teams ranked in the top 25 from the Pac-12. Well, they play 5 of them in their next 6 games, 4 of them in their next 5, right? Colorado. Oh, and then right. They have Stanford, Washington State, Utah. That is through the lens of this season in the Pac-12, that is the murderer's row of the schedule, and then you get USC a couple weeks later. So it is going to get very real for the Ducks very fast. So what happens against Colorado this weekend should be, a somewhat interesting bellwether or barometer of where things are going. But I think we would agree, far from the biggest test that they're going to face in the coming weeks.
Agreed. Look, it's the conference opener against an opponent that's naturally going to gain a lot of attention and whatnot. But let's not let their current success don't minimize it, because that's you set yourself up for some real peril there. Don't minimize it. Don't look down on it. They have beaten 2 Power 5 teams. They may not be very good. I don't know about TCU just yet. I don't know. Maybe they're not very good. Nebraska probably in for a little bit of a challenge right now, to be honest. Colorado State, they're in a close game with a not very good Mountain West team. Okay. But don't overlook it. However, if a month ago we were talking about this game, at best, you would have been expecting Colorado to be 1-2. They're 3-0. Yep. That's the credit to them. Yep. There is a reason why this line is 21 points by way of outside expectations. So even with success, there still comes a degree of reality. Is this a big matchup? Is this going to generate lots of eyeballs and attention? Yes. Is this the biggest matchup, the most challenging matchup on Oregon's schedule in the 2023 season? No, very much not. If it becomes that way by the time it's 5:00 Saturday night and we're feeling like, wow, that was that big a test, something has probably gone very wrong. And then you have all kinds of questions about the forthcoming matchups you lay out. So big opener, lots of hype, all those things. Let's not lose perspective. This is still a program very much building and looks like they're well on their way. And they will bring many eyeballs to the Big 12 eventually when they do.
They're going to be a great asset to the Big 12. And I mean, James, if this goes the way we think it will, or at least I certainly am on record saying I think it will. It sounds like you're of the same mind. This is going to be a big Saturday for Oregon, right? You're talking about millions and millions and millions of eyeballs on Eugene, Autzen Stadium, on Dan Lanning's program, on their style of play, which is very, very appealing. I imagine this will be a very useful recruiting weekend for Oregon as well. So looking forward to seeing what they do. If it goes the way, I've obviously said that it should, will be a really good weekend for Oregon. They'll be 4-0 going into much more the meat of their schedule once they get past Stanford next week. So James Crepea, Oregon Ducks beat writer for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Thank you for joining me on the Oregonian Sports Podcast. We'll do this again soon.
Thanks, Bill.
Appreciate it. And thanks to those of you for listening to the Oregonian Sports Podcast, formerly Sports by Northwest, but now the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I'm Bill Oram. Thank you for listening.